Chin stood before her mirror, adjusting the borrowed diamond necklace that sparkled against her neck. The necklace, like everything else in her apartment, was just another piece in her carefully crafted illusion. Deep down, she knew the truth. She was the daughter of a poor market woman, but no one in the city needed to know that. I will never marry a poor man, she declared to her reflection, rehearsing the words she often spoke to others. Never. Her friend Yu sat on the bed behind her, watching with worried eyes. Unlike Chin, Yu had made peace with her humble beginnings. She wore her simple clothes with dignity and loved her hardworking husband, even though he earned little as a driver for a wealthy businessman. Money isn't everything, Chin, Yu said softly, remembering how she had helped Chin move to the city years ago. Your mother misses you. She asked about you at the market yesterday. Chin's face hardened at the mention of her mother. Don't speak of her here. I've told you before that life is behind me. The rented luxury car waited outside, its monthly payments eating away at money Chin didn't have. But she needed it to maintain her image in the wealthy circles she desperately wanted to join. Every morning, she drove past the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, imagining herself living in one of those mansions. She had become an expert at borrowing money, creating elaborate stories about her fictional wealthy family abroad. The truth was simpler and harder. Her mother sold vegetables in a village market, and her father had died leaving nothing but debts. But Chin buried these truths deep inside herself, covering them with designer clothes she couldn't afford and parties she shouldn't attend. You watched her friend with a heavy heart. She remembered the young girl who had shared her dreams under mango trees in their village. That girl had wanted to become a teacher, to help other children learn. Now she saw a woman consumed by appearances, drowning in loans and lies. The married man who lent you this car, what happens when his wife finds out? You asked, her voice filled with concern. She won't, Chin replied sharply. And soon I won't need his cars anymore. I'm close to meeting someone. Someone with real wealth, old money. Then all of this pretending will be worth it. You stood up, gathering her old but clean handbag. I hope you find what you're looking for, my friend. But remember, the higher you build a house of lies, the harder it falls. Chin barely heard her friend's words. She was too busy planning her next move, her next lie, her next chance to climb higher into the world she desperately wanted to join. Outside her window, the city's tall buildings gleamed in the morning sun, their windows reflecting light like the diamonds she borrowed but could never own. What she didn't realize was that fate had already set in motion events that would bring her carefully constructed world crashing down around her. But for now, she stood before her mirror, practicing her smile, rehearsing her stories, and dreaming of a life she would do anything to claim as her own. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, printed on thick cream paper with gold lettering that caught the light. It promised an evening among the city's elite, exactly the kind of opportunity Chin had been waiting for. But the price of admission was far beyond what she could afford, even with her web of loans and borrowed favors. That same morning, a letter arrived from her village. Her mother's house had flooded in the heavy rains, threatening to wash away the few possessions her family owned. Chin read the desperate words with growing irritation, seeing not her family's suffering, but an opportunity. The land documents, she whispered to herself, a plan forming in her mind. Her family's small plot of land was worth little, but it could be used as collateral, just long enough to secure the money she needed for the party. The next day, she made the journey to her village, wearing her simplest clothes, though they were still far too fine for the dusty roads and humble houses. Her mother's joy at seeing her quickly turned to confusion when Chin spoke of taking the land documents for safekeeping. But daughter, her mother said, her weathered hands clutching the old papers, this land is all we have. Your father's father cleared it with his own hands. Chin felt a flicker of shame, but pushed it away. Trust me, Mama. The floods could destroy everything. I'll keep them safe in the city. Her mother's eyes, clouded with age but still sharp with wisdom, searched her daughter's face. She saw something there that made her heart heavy, but her love for Chin was stronger than her doubt. She handed over the documents, her hands trembling slightly. Back in the city, Chin moved quickly. She knew exactly which money lenders would accept land documents without asking too many questions. The transaction left a bitter taste in her mouth, but the invitation to the exclusive party was worth it. Or so she told herself. The night of the party arrived, and Chin transformed herself. She wore a borrowed designer dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her borrowed jewelry caught the light, and her borrowed confidence made her walk tall. No one would guess that underneath it all, her heart was racing with fear of being discovered. The mansion where the party was held took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, and the floors were polished marble that reflected the elegant crowd like mirrors. This was the world she desperately wanted to belong to, and tonight she would do anything to claim it. Then she saw him. Tobe stood by the bar, tall and elegant in his perfectly tailored suit. Everyone knew who he was, the heir to one of the country's oldest fortunes. He carried his wealth with an ease that came from never having to prove it. Unlike the other wealthy men Chin had pursued, Tobe had something more than money. He had the kind of old wealth that could never be faked. What Chin didn't notice, as she carefully made her way toward him, was how his eyes seemed to see right through her carefully constructed facade. She didn't notice how he watched her approach with a slight smile that held secrets of its own. She was too focused on her goal, too convinced of her own performance, to see the trap she was walking into. The evening air was heavy with perfume and promise, and somewhere in the village, an old woman prayed for her daughter's happiness, not knowing that the land she had trusted to her child was already being used to buy an illusion. But illusions, like the borrowed jewelry Chin wore, always have to be returned, often at a much higher price than their original worth. Obsession grew in Chin's heart like a thorny vine, wrapping around every thought until Tobe was all she could see. She learned his schedule by heart, which coffee shop he visited each morning, where he played tennis on weekends, even which pew he preferred in church. Every Sunday, she sat 3 rows behind him, wearing dresses she couldn't afford, pretending to pray while watching him instead. But Tobe wasn't alone. Indy, his girlfriend, was always there, her quiet grace and genuine smile a stark contrast to Chin's calculated movements. Where Chin wore borrowed designer clothes, Indy dressed simply but elegantly. Where Chin worked to be noticed, Indy drew attention naturally. This only made Chin more determined. I need information about Indy, Chin told the private investigator, sliding an envelope of borrowed money across his desk. Everything you can find. The investigator, a tired man with knowing eyes, took her money and began his work. But after weeks of searching, he returned with disappointing news. There's nothing, he said, shrugging. No scandals, no secrets. She's exactly what she appears to be. Chin's frustration turned to rage. She paced her apartment that night, the walls closing in around her as she realized how much money she'd wasted. Her phone buzzed with messages from people she owed money to, but she ignored them. She had to focus on her goal. If there's no dirt to find, she whispered to herself, staring at her reflection, then I'll have to create some. She bought a second phone with her last bit of money. Late at night, she carefully crafted messages, making them seem like they came from someone who knew Indy's secrets. She found photos of Indy at charity events, skillfully editing them to suggest inappropriate relationships. Each manipulation felt like another step toward her goal, but also another step away from herself. The day Tobe received the anonymous messages, Chin watched from her usual coffee shop spot as he read them. She saw his face change, saw the doubt creep into his eyes. It should have felt like victory, but something heavy settled in her stomach instead. That evening, you visited unexpectedly. She found Chin surrounded by unpaid bills and fashion magazines, planning her next move. Well, I heard rumors, you said quietly, about what you're doing to that girl, Indy. This isn't you, Chin. What happened to the girl who used to share her lunch with hungry children at school? Chin turned away from her oldest friend. That girl was poor and powerless. I'm different now. Are you? You asked, looking around at the rented furniture and borrowed artwork. Or are you just better at pretending? But Chin wasn't listening anymore. She was too busy watching her phone, waiting for news about Tobe and Indy's inevitable breakup. When she heard they were taking a break, she felt her chance had finally come. She began appearing wherever Tobe went, offering sympathy, understanding, and carefully crafted stories about her own fictional heartbreaks. She brought him home-cooked meals, prepared in a kitchen she could barely afford, planned thoughtful outings, funded by more borrowed money, and worked to become indispensable to him. What she didn't see was how Tobe's politeness masked his growing suspicion. She didn't notice how he watched her when she wasn't performing, how he caught the small inconsistencies in her stories. She was too focused on her goal to see that she was walking into a trap of her own making. One evening, emboldened by what she saw as progress, Chin made her move. In Tobe's elegantly furnished living room, she leaned in to kiss him, certain that this was her moment of triumph. But Tobe stepped back, his eyes not full of desire, but something closer to disgust. The rejection stung like a slap, but Chin was too far gone to stop now. She began to cry, telling him how much she loved him, how Indy didn't deserve him, how they were meant to be together. Tobe listened in silence, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. I think you should leave Chin. She left his house that night, but not her obsession. In her mind, this was just a temporary setback. She didn't realize that her desperate actions had already set in motion events that would bring her carefully constructed world crashing down around her. That night, as she lay in her bed surrounded by the trappings of her fake life, Chin dreamed of victory. But somewhere in the city, Tobe was making phone calls. Indy was smiling knowingly, and the truth was preparing to make its grand entrance. The morning sun had barely touched Tobe's elegant garden when Chin saw her mother at the gates. Her heart stopped. There stood the woman she had worked so hard to hide. Her mother, in her faded wrapper and worn sandals, clutching a plastic bag and looking lost among the manicured hedges. Mama? Chin whispered, her voice tight with panic. She rushed outside before any of Tobe's staff could notice. What are you doing here? Her mother's face, weathered by years of working under the sun, creased with worry. Chin, strange men came to our village. They say our land belongs to them now. They showed papers. Where are our documents? The weight of what Chin had done pressed against her chest. The land documents she had used as collateral, her family's only inheritance, were now in the hands of money lenders. But she couldn't admit this. Not here. Not now, when she was so close to everything she wanted. Yet in the car, Chin hissed, grabbing her mother's arm. We can't talk here. But her mother stood firm, her old strength showing through. No, daughter. Tell me what's happening to our land. Your brother can't sleep. I haven't eaten in 2 days from worry. Chin looked over her shoulder at Tobe's house, paranoid that he might appear at any moment. In her desperation, she made a decision that would haunt her forever. She pulled her mother around to the back of the house, toward her parked car. Just for a moment, Chin said, opening the trunk. Hide here until I finish something important. Please, Mama. Just for a few minutes. Her mother's eyes widened with hurt and disbelief. Hide. Like a thief? Like something shameful? Please. Chin begged, her voice cracking. I'll explain everything later. When her mother finally climbed into the trunk, each movement slow with age and dignity, Chin felt something break inside her. She closed the trunk gently, trying not to think about what she was doing to the woman who had given her life. Back inside, Tobe was preparing to leave for a meeting. Chin forced a smile, told him she had to go, and walked to her car with measured steps while her heart raced. As she drove away, her mother silent in the trunk, tears began to fall down her face. At her apartment, after helping her mother out, the full weight of what she'd done hit her. Her mother sat on her rented sofa, looking small and lost among the fake designer pillows and borrowed art pieces. You've changed, her mother said softly. The daughter I raised would never put her mother in a car trunk like a bag of rice. Before Chin could respond, you walked in, using the spare key she still had from their early days as friends. She stopped short at the sight of Chin's mother. Mama, you rushed to greet the older woman with proper respect. What's wrong? Why are you crying? The story came out in pieces. The land, the trunk, the shame. You listen, her face growing darker with each detail. When Chin's mother finished speaking, Yu turned to her friend. Have you lost your mind? Yu's voice shook with anger. Your own mother? In a car trunk? For what? For a man who doesn't even love you? You don't understand. Chin shot back, her shame turning to defensive anger. I've worked too hard to let anything ruin this. Even my own mother. Yu stood up, her simple dress suddenly seeming more dignified than all of Chin's borrowed designer clothes. No, you're right. I don't understand. I don't understand how the girl who once shared her last piece of bread with me could become someone who hides her own mother like a shameful secret. Chin's mother rose slowly, her dignity intact despite everything. Take me to the bus station, you. My daughter needs time to remember who she really is. As you led the old woman out, she turned back one last time. One day, Chin, all these lies will come crashing down. And when they do, I pray you'll still have someone left who remembers the real you. Chin watched them leave, standing alone in her apartment full of borrowed things. The sun caught her fake diamond necklace, throwing sparkles on the wall. But for the first time, she noticed how cold and empty those sparkles looked. In the distance, she heard a car start, taking her mother back to the village she had tried so hard to forget. The sound of her phone ringing broke through her thoughts. It was Tobe, asking her to come to dinner that evening. His voice was warm, inviting, and Chin pushed away her guilt, convinced that once she had secured her place in his world, she could make everything right again. What she didn't know was that her moment of triumph was about to become her greatest humiliation. The stage was set, the actors were in place, and the truth was ready to make its devastating entrance. The grand hall sparkled like a dream come true. Crystal chandeliers cast their light over tables draped in silk, while flowers worth a village's monthly income filled the air with their sweet scent. Chin stood in the center of it all, wearing a dress Tobe had specially chosen for her, feeling like a princess in a fairy tale. The city's elite filled the room. Business tycoons, politicians, old money families. These were the people Chin had desperately wanted to belong with, and tonight, she thought, they would finally accept her as one of their own. Tobe's family sat in the front row, their quiet dignity making her heart race with anticipation. You look beautiful, Tobe whispered as he took her hand. His touch felt different tonight, firmer, more purposeful. But Chin was too lost in her moment of triumph to notice the steel beneath his smile. When Tobe stepped up to the microphone, Chin's heart soared. This was it, her moment of victory, the culmination of all her lies and sacrifices. She watched him with adoring eyes as he began to speak. Love, Tobe began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, is built on truth. He paused, looking directly at Chin. Tonight, I want to share a story about truth and lies. The large screen behind him flickered to life. Chin's smile froze as the first image appeared, herself, in her worn dress from years ago, haggling over secondhand clothes in the market. The crowd murmured. No, she whispered, but more images followed. There she was, arguing with creditors, borrowing money, crafting her elaborate lies. Each photo, each video clip, stripped away another layer of her carefully constructed facade. Then came the most devastating footage. Chin forcing her mother into the car trunk. The gasps from the audience cut through her like knives. She saw the horror on their faces, the disgust, the judgment she had feared all her life. Chin, Tobe's voice was cold now, thought she could build a life on lies. She thought she could fool me, fool all of us, into believing she was something she's not. The door at the back of the hall opened. Chin's mother walked in, led by her brother. But they weren't in their village clothes anymore. They wore new, dignified outfits, and walked with heads held high. These are the people Chin rejected, Tobe announced. The family she was ashamed of. The mother she hid in a car trunk rather than acknowledge. Tears streamed down Chin's face as she watched her mother approach the stage. But her mother didn't look at her. Instead, she turned to Tobe, who bowed respectfully before her. Mama, Tobe said, his voice gentle now, you raised a daughter who lost her way. But while she tried to hide you, we found you, and we will honor you, because true wealth lies not in what we own, but in how we treat others. Another figure emerged from the shadows, Indy, radiant in a simple but elegant dress. She walked to Tobe's side, their fingers intertwining naturally. You thought you were so clever, Indy said to Chin, her voice carrying across the silent room. Every lie you told, every scheme you planned, we knew. We watched you destroy yourself with your own greed. Chin's knees buckled. She reached for a chair to steady herself, but there was nothing to hold on to. Just like her lies, everything solid was slipping away. Security, Tobe called. Please escort Miss Chin out. Her performance is over. As the guards approached, Chin looked desperately around the room. These people, whose approval she had craved so desperately, now wouldn't meet her eyes. Her borrowed jewelry felt like chains, her designer dress like a prisoner's uniform. Tobe, please, she begged, her voice breaking. I can't explain, but he had already turned away, his arm around Indy, speaking softly to Chin's mother. The guards took her arms gently but firmly, leading her toward the exit. As she walked the long aisle between the tables, Chin saw her entire false life crumbling around her. The whispers followed her like shadows. The people who had once admired her now pulled back their clothes to avoid touching her as she passed. At the door, she turned one last time, hoping to see someone, anyone, looking at her with compassion. Instead, she saw Tobe raising a glass in a toast. To truth, his voice carried to where she stood, and to those who honor it. The heavy doors closed behind her, and Chin found herself alone in the night, surrounded by the ruins of her lies. Inside, the party continued without her. The sound of celebration, a mocking reminder of everything she had lost in her desperate pursuit of a life that was never meant to be hers. Life has a way of teaching its harshest lessons when we least expect them. As Chin sat alone in her apartment the day after her humiliation, surrounded by notice letters demanding the return of her borrowed clothes and jewelry, she finally understood the true cost of her lies. The phone hadn't stopped ringing, not with sympathy calls, but with demands from creditors who had seen the news of her public disgrace. One by one, they came to reclaim their possessions. The designer dresses, the sparkling jewelry, the luxury furniture. Everything that had made up her false life was stripped away, leaving only the bare walls of truth. Meanwhile, across town, you received life-changing news of her own. Her husband, who had faithfully served as a driver for 12 years, inherited a substantial portion of his employer's wealth. The old businessman had seen in Yu's husband something that Chin had never understood: the value of honest work and genuine character. You've been more than a driver, the lawyer read from the will. You've been a son to me. Your honesty in handling my affairs, your dedication to hard work, and your humility in all things have proven your worth. You and her husband moved into a beautiful home, not because they had schemed for it, but because they had earned it through years of integrity. Their new wealth felt clean, deserved, and their happiness was genuine. Tobe and Indy's wedding was the talk of the city. Unlike Chin's fake engagement party, their celebration was warm with real love and honest joy. Chin's mother sat in a place of honor, treated with the respect her quiet dignity deserved. Under Tobe's care, she and Chin's brother now lived comfortably, their family land restored and protected by proper legal documents. But the true transformation happened in the quietest of places. One rainy evening, weeks after her downfall, Chin found herself back in her village. She stood before her mother's small house, no longer wearing borrowed clothes or fake jewelry. Her hair was simple, her dress plain, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight of truth in her heart. "Mama," she whispered when the door opened. "I'm sorry." Her mother looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the fake socialite or the schemer, but her daughter, finally real, finally honest. Without a word, she opened her arms. In that embrace, Chin felt something she had never found in all her borrowed luxuries: the genuine warmth of unconditional love. Tears fell, not of shame this time, but of cleansing. Her mother's forgiveness, unlike everything else she had chased, was freely given, asking nothing in return except truth. You visited them that weekend, arriving in her new car, but wearing the same kind smile she'd always had. She brought food to share, just as they had shared meals in their childhood. Her wealth hadn't changed her heart. The funny thing about life, you said as they sat together, is that it gives us what we deserve, not what we pretend to deserve. They sat in the simple house, eating simple food, sharing genuine laughter. Through the window, They could see the village children playing, their joy unconnected to the cost of their clothes or the size of their homes. Chin watched them, remembering how she had once been like them, genuine, unafraid of who she was. She thought of all the time she had wasted chasing a false life, when real happiness had been within reach all along. Years later, people would still tell the story of Chin's dramatic fall from her artificial grace. But fewer knew about her quiet rise into genuine dignity. She found work teaching at the village school, earning respect not through borrowed status, but through honest effort. Her students loved her not for what she pretended to be, but for who she truly was. Sometimes, when she passed the grand houses in the city during school trips, her students would ask if she wished she lived in such luxury. Chin would smile, thinking of her small but honest home, her reconciled family, and her peaceful heart. True wealth, she would tell them, isn't about what you own or what others think of you. It's about being able to look in the mirror and respect the person you see there. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all, that a life built on truth, no matter how humble, shines brighter than all the borrowed diamonds in the world. Use unexpected fortune, Tobe and Indy's genuine love, and even Chin's hard-earned redemption, all prove that life rewards not those who chase appearances, but those who hold fast to their authentic selves. The village market still stood, its simple stalls and honest traders continuing their ancient dance of commerce. And if you look carefully, you might see Chin there sometimes, helping her mother sell vegetables, no longer ashamed but proud, finally understanding that true richness grows not from what we pretend to be, but from who we really are.